Okay, we need a database server, and the way that we're going to run our database server is via Docker. So if you do not have this installed on your computer yet, this is something that you'll need. Docker is going to be a first-class citizen in our application, and eventually all of our application is going to be running, or each service is going to be running as a Docker container. But first of all, we need a database server, and the fastest, quickest, easiest way to get one up and running is via Docker, because Postgres, like all other database server providers, do provide a Docker image that makes it super easy and fast to get one up and running on our machines. Now, you do need to install Docker, and each operating system has a slightly different way of installing it, and if you're on Windows, then please do take a look at the documentation and take a look at download and install, because for Windows you need to take a different step depending on whether you're on a home version of Windows or the professional version of Windows. So do come in here, take a look, and please follow these installation instructions to get this up and running. It should just work fine, but just in case, do take the precaution to take a look at this. Make sure your operating system meets the requirements, and if you do need to do something at the BIOS level, then please take a look at this specifically. On a Mac, it's pretty straightforward. You just need to run the installer, but Windows, I do believe you want to take a bit of care about what you're doing here and follow these instructions. But once you do have Docker installed and up and running, then you should be able to open up the Docker desktop and see something like this. Now inside here, you've got the ability to change a few settings, and you can control how much resources this is using on your computer. I think it's normally 4. I don't quite know why this is set to 5. I'm pretty sure I normally had it at 4, but I'll keep it as 5 so I don't have to restart. And it does consume a fair bit of memory when you've got some servers up and running. Now I mentioned in the introduction section to go out and test the finished running application to make sure your computer can handle what we're doing on this training course. And as long as you can run the finished application without killing your computer, then you should be good with everything that we're doing in this course. And now that we've checked that, let's go and get a Postgres server up and running on our computer. And the way that we're going to approach this is to use a Docker Compose file that tells Docker what it is we want to run. So inside the solution, and in fact I'm going to go to the file system view here because we want our Docker Compose in the root of our solution. It's going to have more than one service that's running inside as a container. So we'll do this at the solution level, and we'll create a new file, and this is going to be called docker-compose.yaml. And it has to be called docker-compose.yaml, otherwise you'll need to write a bit of extra in the command when it comes to running your containers. But if you use docker-compose, then we can just use a very simple command to get things up and running. Now we've got a prompt here from VS Code asking me if I want to install the recommended Docker extension. I am going to say yes, because when we're composing these YAML files, they're very fussy, and if we use the Docker extension, then it will also give us syntax support for the YAML files as well. So that's now installed. And the way that we write these is that we specify the services we want to add, and notice that we do get auto-completion support inside this file. So I'm going to specify services, and then very specifically we need to tab, and then we can specify the name of the service, what we're going to call it. In this case I'm just going to call it Postgres, and then we add another tab, and then we specify the image that we want. Now if you try and do this at the wrong level and I start typing image here, notice that I don't get any auto-completion, and that's because we have to provide the level that we want this particular configuration section. If I'm at the right level, then I'm going to get the image auto-completion popping up to say that, yep, I can use this at this level. So these files are very fussy, so I would recommend you have that Docker extension installed just to keep you on the right track when you're typing these files, because it will identify when you've done something wrong. Now below the image, and the image by the way of course is going to be Postgres, we're just using the standard Postgres image for this, and then we can supply this with some environment variables, and specifically the one that we need to provide is the password we're going to use. So I'm going to specify an environment environment variable called Postgres_password, and the password is going to match what we used inside the app settings development.json, so Postgres PW. And then we specify the ports that we want this to run on. Now, Docker networking provides an external port that we can use from our operating system to connect to the service inside Docker, and it also has an internal port which the service is going to be running on. Now, in this case, we're going to go for 5432:5432, which means that we access Postgres from the outside of Docker on that port and from the inside of Docker on the same port. And because this is a database server, we need to provide this with some storage because it's going to persist our data. And we'll specify that the volumes, we're going to have pg data :var/lib/postgresql/data, and this allows Docker to use external storage to Docker, our operating system storage, to store the data for our database. And then below this, we're going to specify volumes and pg data. And importantly, we need a colon after pg data as well. So with this Docker compose file in place, now we can run a Postgres server. So I'm just going to open up the terminal once again. I'm going to go to a new tab, and we want to be at the solution level where our Docker compose file is located. So if I list the contents, then we can see we have this particular file. Now, in order to run the services inside Docker from this Docker compose file, we just need to run docker compose up, and we'll specify -d so it runs in detached mode so we don't see the logs inside the terminal, and press return. And the first time we run this, it's going to go out to Docker repository and pull down the image from Postgres and start it. So it might take a bit longer on your machine if you've not done this with this particular image before, but once you've done that, we should have the fact that it is started. And if we go take a look at the Docker desktop, then we can see that we've got our Postgres image. It's running on ports 5432, and if we click on the image, we can go and see its logs, and we want to see that the database system is ready to accept connections, and that means Docker is running and it started successfully. Now, if we go back to VS Code, what we should be able to do is go back to our first tab inside the auction service we need to be for this, and we can execute .NET EF database updates and press return, and what we should find is that our table gets created inside the Postgres database server. And indeed, we've got the create table action taking place and the create table items taking place. Now, if we want to see what's inside our database, we can do so, but that does mean adding another extension. I'll just go to the extensions, and I'm going to search for Postgres. And the one that is quite good is this one called PostgreSQL by Chris Kolkman. And I'm going to go ahead and install this one. And this puts a little tab on the left-hand side with the PostgreSQL Explorer. And if I click on this, then we've got the option to add a new connection. So I'm just going to create a new connection. And we specify the host name of the database. That's running on local host, so I'll use that. The PostgreSQL user is going to be Postgres. That's the name of the user. The password is what we specified, so PostgresPW. And I think I typed that in wrong, so I'm just going to be careful and delete it and try again. And the port number is going to be 5432. Do we want to use an SSL connection? Nope, we want the standard connection. And we want to specify auctions as the name of the database. And then the display name of the database I'm just going to keep as localhost. And now we've got a connection to our database server. And if I go in, I can see the auctions database has been created. Inside public, we can see the tables. And we've got a table for auctions with all of its columns, and same for the items. And we've got an extra table for EF migrations history, which Entity Framework uses to check which migrations have been applied already to this database. And if we select the top 1000, then we'll see in the results here that we have an entry for the migration that we created and the version number of the .NET runtime that it was created on. So that looks good. But we've got an empty database for our auctions and our items, and we'll take a look at addressing that next.